Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us at this session where we're going to be talking about food and agriculture. So my name is Zitouni Uldada. I'm a global expert on climate change, food security and sustainability. I was working for the United Nations for 11 years until a couple of months and now back in the UK. So thank you for joining us, and I'd like this to be quite interactive where we can hear from you as well what you think of this topic. But let me just set scene by saying a couple of things about food and agriculture and where we are and why it matters and why we're having this discussion here. So the way we've been really growing and consuming food has been causing so much damage to us, people, and to the environment. Because on one hand, we have 730 million people who still go hungry every day. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we have around 2 billion people who are obese or overweight. And in addition to that, in terms of impact on nature, we have agriculture who's responsible for the third of global greenhouse gas emissions and also responsible for soil degradation, biodiversity loss. So there are environmental and health impact of the way we grow and consume food. So we're supposed to be growing food to feed and nourish people, and yet we have so many problems associated with this model of how we're doing this. We are producing more food than ever before, and yet we have more hungry people than ever before. So it doesn't make any sense. So we need to fix this problem. We need to do something about how we are producing food without having this negative impact on our health and on the health of the planet. And agriculture and climate change, they depend on each other. They're so interconnected because agriculture is the sector that is most sensitive to the impact of climate change. And you see it all around us in terms of impacts from droughts and floodings and other impacts that affect food production and food security around the world. And the other thing about agriculture is all the problems that I mentioned, it is also an important part of the solution to the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. So there are many issues, but we need to turn this around, not to keep talking about the problems that we know, but focus more on what solutions we need to scale up so we can tackle this issue. So what we're talking about is a transformation of the agri-food systems. We need to change the system, as I was saying, because it's not fit for purpose anymore. There are many things we need to change so that we are feeding and nourishing people while at the same time protecting the national capital, protecting nature, protecting biodiversity and the natural resources in general. And at the last conference of the parties, COP28 in United Arab Emirates, for the first time it's been encouraging to see that actually world leaders recognize the need for this food transformation and recognize this through the UAE Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture and Resilient Food Systems. So it's a good political signal, if you like, that says, yeah, we do have a problem, we need to do something about it. So at this panel today, this is what we're going to try to do. I'm going to ask the panelists two questions. One, which is, what is holding back the transformation of the agri-food systems? What are the issues that they see from their perspective and where they work as being really important that we need to tackle to overcome difficulties and barriers? And the second question is going to be about, well, what are the solutions that look promising and we need to scale up to help us achieve this transformation? And please feed in your thoughts and views as well. I'll be looking at them in screen here. If you have any particular question to any panelist, I'll be happy to ask that if you're short and brief. But it'd be nice to hear your thoughts as well, what you think the difficulties are, and also the solutions that you think we need to give more attention to. So hopefully by the end of the session we can all have some ideas of what are the main challenges and where the world needs to focus more effort in solving this problem. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists. So we have with us Baroness Natalie Bennett, who's the former leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. And we also have Danush Dinesh, who is the founder of Clim Eat. And we have Shaina Harris, who's the managing partner at the Supply Chain Capital, and Emma Keller, who's the head of sustainability at Nestle UK and Ireland. So I'll start with you, Baroness Natalie. As I said, the first question is, and by the way, each one of you has 3 minutes. So if I stop you, don't take it personally. So just keep things flowing, and hopefully we can hear from people also on their thoughts. So if we can start with the first point on, from your point of view, what is one important thing that is really holding back this transformation of the agri-food systems so we can move on to the benefits that I mentioned?
Well, what I would say is the key problem is the oligarchic domination of a handful of companies at all stages along the food chain. And I rely heavily here on the work of Jennifer Clapp, who's a Canadian academic who's done a lot of excellent work on this. And if you look at seeds, if you look at fertilizers, if you look at bulk distribution of food around the world, if you look at manufacturing, if you look at supply chains, what you've got all the way is there used to be a big 6, and then it becomes a big 5, and then it becomes a big 4 that essentially dominates around about 80% of the market. And what Jennifer Clapp has really uncovered that's really interesting is the fact that BlackRock and Vanguard and a couple of other companies each own 10% of each one of those companies. So we've essentially got a single system and a single way of operating through an oligarchic domination of our entire global food system. What do we need to do about that? What I would say is we need to de-industrialise our food system. And that means we need to get away from thinking of food as a bulk commodity and producing local, healthy, varied food in each region. It means deglobalising large parts of the food system as well. What right do we have in the UK to depend on others people's water, soil and labour to feed us? We need to be feeding ourselves. And the way we need to approach that is agroecological approaches. Industrial farming relies on essentially coshing nature into submission. There's a pest, throw some pesticide at it. There's not enough nitrogen in this field, throw some nitrogen on this field. We need to get away to a system where we care for our soils, where we have diverse crops that work together, integrated pest management, but beyond that, not creating enormous expansive fields that just say to pests and diseases, come here, there's a feast here, come and feast here. So we need to de-industrialise the system. As you said, we're producing more food than ever before. In the UK, about 50% of what's arable land is going to produce food for animals in factory farming or going to biofuels. In the US, it's 2/3. How do we feed the world? We stop the food waste that is feeding perfectly good food to animals and feed it to humans instead. End factory farming, which we're going to have to because of antimicrobial resistance, an issue I do a lot of work on. And so that means much more crop diversity, agroecological approaches, and that means we have to break the dominance of the oligarchic companies. And to do that, what we have to do is recognise they're imposing massive amount of externalised costs on all of us. They're taking the profits and we're all paying through that system, deeply destructive in terms of climate, in terms of nature, in terms of our own health, in terms of pesticides. We're starting to realise, we've exceeded the planetary boundaries for novel entities, for shorthands, pesticides, pharmaceuticals and plastics. All of those things the food system contributes to enormously. So I guess I'll do it now. Little advert, I've got a book out. My publisher tells me I have to do this. We have to change everything about our food system and everything else. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Danush?
Thanks, Zituni, and thanks, Baroness, for the really provocative start. And I agree with many of the points you've shared. But for me, I've worked in other sectors as well, and I've been working in food over the last 10, 12 years. And it was interesting for me to learn from the organizers that this is the first time that food is being featured here. And congratulations on that. But very often in the global climate debate, food is very late, you know. And why is that? And I think food is not just a technical area with solutions. It's also the politics, it's religion, it's our personal choices, our philosophy. So it's highly fragmented and contested zone, you know. So wherever I go for a meeting, you know, people are always fighting with each other because some people eat meat, some people don't eat meat, you know, and some people are working on agroecological approaches, some are working on technological approaches. And, you know, what I see is this kind of debates and discussions, but it goes beyond that, that kind of blocks progress. Because I feel we are losing the pragmatism of finding solutions and implementing them as we lose time, because we are in the space where it's too contested and we can never agree on a solution. So my perspective, and so I kind of got fed up of being in this space for like over a decade, so then I started my own organization, Climb Eat. We call ourselves a think and do tank. So what we want to do is try and find new ideas around transforming food systems and then work rapidly with partners to get them actioned. And one area we are seeing opportunity is around innovations. And it's great to hear about so many innovations here, and especially from other sectors. And in agriculture, we see an innovation gap, you know. So if we apply all the technologies that we are aware of in food and agriculture now at scale, everywhere possible, we would still be not achieving the 1.5 degree goal. You know, we only get to about 60% of that. So we really need to think about agriculture differently. We need to step outside and think about what are the other ways. The Baroness mentioned nitrogen fertilizers, for example. That's 2% of global emissions. So in the short term, we need to think about what are the other alternatives. Are there better ways to produce fertilizers? There are solutions out there, but in the longer term, what are the completely different alternatives? There are lots of emerging technologies around microbial fertilizers. Can we think about systems which won't cost that emissions? So I would leave it at there, but what I would like to stress is we need to not be fixated on the debate, but we need to move beyond that, looking at innovations, looking at agroecological approaches, resetting the power structures, and be pragmatic.
Absolutely, no, thank you. And I pick up two things from Baroness and from yourself. You know, particularly, I was very pleased to hear that you mentioned the issue of food loss and waste, because it's something that still really having big problems, and we are not doing enough about it to stop wasting food, basically, given that there's still almost 800 million people who go hungry every day. And then the issue you mentioned about efficiency. I think the whole system needs to become more efficient, not just in terms of the use of fertilizers, but the use of water, of energy, and everything else. I think these are the two things holding back this transformation we've been talking about. Shaina?
Yes, it's wonderful to be here, and I love that we started the panel in a spicy way. I don't think we do that enough in the US, so thank you for setting the ground for this, and we need it, right, to find solutions. So I love what you shared about needing to find solutions from all the different actors in the system. I've been in the food system working on sustainability for the last 25 years, but from different angles. So I was at Oxfam for many years doing campaign and activism work. I then went in-house at Mars to try to be a change maker there. I then ran a startup in Chicago on fresh food access. We had a lot of success, and now I have a venture capital firm. And I think that we actually need actors around the system coming together to find these solutions and accelerate the solutions. So I really appreciate the perspectives of everyone on the panel. One of the driving statistics underlying our investment thesis at our firm is that 75% of what we eat globally comes from just 12 crops and 5 animals. And the U.S. subsidy system and U.S. politicians and all the very strong lobby that is influencing it is responsible for this. The challenge is it makes it very expensive for alternatives to come to the market. So Supply Change Capital, our mission is focused on investing in early stage technologies, so pre-seed and seed stage will go in pre-revenue, that are focused on regenerative food systems. So we have done ag tech, food tech, manufacturing tech, supply chain tech. We're also 2 women sitting in investment seats, so we represent less than 10% of U.S. allocators that are women. My co-founder is a woman of color, so even less. And part of our theory of change is we need all of us at the table. most of the capital in the US goes to white men. And when you get two women investing in a woman of color, you see a lot of diversity of solutions coming to the table. So it's something we're also very passionate about. I would say one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we invest in technologies and get them to a level playing field, given the commodity system in the US and the distortion that it has on our global food system. We've seen a lot of challenges in the alternative protein market. We know that we have to figure out, for animal products, meat, dairy, leather, et cetera, we've got to figure out how to farm those more sustainably and also introduce alternatives to the market. But the alternatives are having a very hard time competing because of our subsidy system. We see it's the same with tropical commodities. We've done a coffee investment, we're looking at cocoa. We need alternatives in those spaces as well. But because of how entrenched the subsidy system is, it makes it very difficult. So I agree with a lot of what's been shared, and I really think we need to take a systems approach. But I'll just add that I'm very disturbed by US politics in many ways, and particularly for what we do, the commodity challenges are a big one to overcome.
Thank you, and thank you for adding, to the discussion the issue of subsidies and also the alternatives. Thank you, Emma.
Hi everybody, I'm Emma Keller, Head of Sustainability at Nestle. So we make Kit Kat, coffee, Quality Street, baby milk, lots of different products. And to do that, we source from over 500,000 farmers globally. We have a huge team of agronomists that are working with those farmers. But it's incredibly challenging to reach all of these farmers all over the world to drive the change that we need to. So we've set a commitment to source half of our raw materials that we source, which would be over 15 million tonnes of commodity from regenerative agriculture practices by 2030. And that is a massive bit of work and a massive effort. So the question posed is kind of what's the challenge holding us back? And like Shana, like many others on the panel, I've been working in the food system for over 20 years now. And if I have to hear the same phrases, no one can do it alone, we need more collaboration, we need more finance, anymore, I'll pull my hair out. It's the same phrases on repeat. So I think we really do need to be provocative and look at, well, what is going to drive change? We can't keep repeating the challenges and not doing anything about it. I think, and maybe Nestle is one of the big companies you mentioned that is a big player in the space. And I think, of course, there's a huge role we can play in terms of the funding we can drive, the reach and the impact we can have. Also, a lot of what we do is provide our knowledge, our technical expertise to the smallholders and to the SMEs to help them bolster in the sector. I think for me there's two challenges, and one's already been mentioned, and that's the commoditization of the food system, which back in the day was a genius idea. How do you collect lots of materials from lots of different places, bundle it together and then sell it out to the company? We're now trying to unpick that and unpack that and decommoditize our food chain, because we're spending so much effort just trying to find out where we buy stuff from. Where are we sourcing from? If we don't know that basic information, how can we drive change on the ground? So a big step forward in how do we create supply chains with more transparency, more visibility, more reach to the ground is one major thing. I think the second major thing really is we've simply asked farmers the wrong question. We have asked farmers to produce as much food as possible, as cheaply as possible, and as quickly as possible. And they've done that. They've absolutely nailed that problem, but to the extent of other externalities, so driving climate change, of soil loss and degradation, of nature degradation. So now we need to ask farmers a different question if we're going to transform the food system. We need them to produce in harmony with nature, that restores our water sources, that restores soil, that sequesters carbon. I think when we start asking those questions, we start funding those questions, they're hearing it from everybody, they're being rewarded on it, then we'll start to see the tipping point in change that we need to see.
Great, thank you very much. So you covered a number of points on the challenges, all of you, and thank you, Emma, also for adding the point of transparency and involving farmers, to be part of this change and the kind of question that we need to ask them. And I think there are questions that we need to ask consumers and citizens as well. And there is a question, there are many questions, obviously I can't ask all of them, so I'm just picking some. So the focus has been a lot on farming and the need to change agriculture. But I think there is also a need to change our mindset, our behavior, and I wonder if some of you want to comment on this. We as consumers, as citizens, we do also have a part of the responsibility in the way we use food and throw it away and use natural resources in general. So as part of this transformation and change, I'll just ask each one of you just to comment on the behavior change and the change in mindset that we need, in addition to what you mentioned, Emma, for farmers also need to be asked different questions, etc.
Well, I will start off by saying that I'm not concerned with individual behaviour. I'm concerned with system change. And we actually had in the UK, people may recall quite a few years ago now, the horse meat scandal. And one of the things that demonstrated was that we eat twice as many ready meals on average as the rest of Europe does. We also have the second longest working hours in Europe, and we have double the average commuting time as the rest of Europe. And when people stagger off the bus, having done a 10-hour day at work, 2 hours each way with their face stuck in someone else's armpit, I do not expect them to go home and slow cook a vegetable stew. It's an unrealistic, totally unreasonable expectation. They will stagger into the Tesco Metro or whatever and pick up a ready meal. So that's why we have to, make the environmentally friendly and socially responsible thing to do and healthy thing to do the easiest, cheapest and simplest. That means changing the system. It means addressing all of those issues, everything from what's available to people. Of course, there's huge food deserts where people don't have fresh fruit and vegetables available to them, and acknowledging that processed food is about 3 times cheaper than the unprocessed healthy diet. We've got to address the cost of healthy food. We've got to address people's time and the capacity. Huge numbers of people living in temporary accommodation in Britain have no cooking facilities.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we agree that the system needs to change. There are many things that need to change, but we as consumers, we also have a choice, and our choice matters, because when we throw food away, that's our choice, and we still throw away the third of the food that is produced for human consumption. It's a lot.
Is that a choice when, I went and did into Lidl in Sheffield a couple of years ago and compared the price of the plastic wrapped 3 peppers versus 1 loose pepper. It was actually cheaper to buy the 3 wrapped in plastic peppers. You do that because it's the cheapest option, and then you end up throwing 1 or 2 of those peppers away. But to actually buy what the amount you actually need is actually more expensive than it is to buy. And supermarkets like it all wrapped up in plastic and easy because it's easy to handle, and they're counting that waste in their system as well.
Can I build on what the Baroness said? I know maybe we're going out of order, so sorry if I'm breaking the rules. But
No, it's good. It's relevant.
I was dying to say the same thing. I am so tired of us putting this on consumers. So in 1999, the first fair trade certification was started in the U.S. Transfair, now it's Fair Trade USA. I was working on a lot of that early stuff at Oxfam. And we had this theory of change. It was over 20 years ago. Consumers are going to pay more for certified, and that's going to fix things. And I'm so annoyed when companies are like, we're doing certification, that's the solution. We cannot put the burden on individual consumers. Of course, we all have morals and ethics, and we'll make choices in what we do and what we buy and how we live. However, the system is critical. Where subsidies are flowing to make what foods cheap, how we live our lives, which is enabling us to make certain choices. In the U.S., we don't have the infrastructure for electric cars, and most of us can't afford Teslas, and if you can, you're on a very long waiting list. Like, the solutions are out there, right? But the money is not flowing in the direction that make the system available to most of us. So I am actually really tired of the onus being put on individual people, and particularly on working class people. Many even my personal family, right? Wanting to do the right thing, wanting to provide their children with the most nutritious meals they can. But it is hard and expensive. People don't have the time. One of the big things we're looking into from a investment standpoint is how do we find technologies that are this intersection of environment and health. And I can talk more about that later, but which really do then enable individuals to do it. But I really am very annoyed that it keeps going back on the consumer, the individual consumer.
Let me just clarify, because maybe there is a misunderstanding there. From the start, we've been saying that the system needs to change. We need to transform the agri-food systems. But we're just saying, as consumers, there are things that we need to do as well. So we're not saying that the burden has to be on the consumers. Absolutely not. And I want to clarify that. It's the system that needs to change. But at the end of the day, we are the people who are part of the system. Okay? And I was asking the question was asked, actually, are there any things from a behavioral point of view that we need to do as consumers to help with this transformation, and not to say, well, it's the people actually who are responsible for this. You see what I mean? So I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, Emma?
I think we're looking at the classic wine glass model here, where you've got in your glass where your wine goes, you've got 8 billion consumers making choices 3 times a day on what they eat. Right at the stem, then how it's balancing, you've got your 1.5 billion farmers globally that are providing that food that go to those consumers. And then in your thin stem, you've got about 500 to 600 policymakers, companies, traders that are controlling the flow of that food from those farmers to those consumers. So where is the power? Clearly it's in that thin bit of the stem. That's who's moving the products from one to the other. And it's the role then of policymakers, of big companies to try and drive that. So I think none of us want to put the burden on consumers. Of course, we can all eat less meat. We can waste less food. We can make different choices. There's lots we can do. We can vote. We can use our voice to ask policymakers to think about the food system. Obviously, there's lots we can do. I think one of the challenges, though, is we need to bring consumers with us. We've renovated, made new products that are at half the amount of sugar. We launched a Milky Bar a few years ago, half the amount of sugar on it. We were so proud. It took a lot of R&D, a lot of money spent on coming up with new technology to make it taste the same. Put it out onto market, proudly branded it. Nobody bought it. It died. The business had died, and all of that investment went in the bin. Even though it was a healthier product, consumers weren't ready for it. When they want to buy a Milky Bar, that's probably going to taste a bit rubbish because it's got half the sugar in it. I'm going to buy the proper one. We need to bring consumers with us. So when we relaunched it, we didn't actually tell anyone it had less sugar in it, and it sold. So a bit of it was by stealth, but we need to work together to bring consumers so that they're ready to make the most environmental and sustainable choices, because otherwise they won't pay a premium, but they want it to be available.
Thank you for adding that. That's why I said we are part of the system as well. The system is not operating in isolation. Danush?
So I'm going to put myself out there because I disagree with all the other panelists, because I do think the role of the consumers is super important. I think the burden, or if we call it burden, or the responsibility needs to be divided across actors in the system, and maybe the more powerful actors who have more control should be responsible more, but farmers and consumers have responsibility too by the choices that they make. I mean, I think about it that way. And there are, I also work with EAT. I serve on the advisory council, and we've come up with a diet which is sustainable and healthy for people. So there are ways in which we can approach diets to make them more sustainable. And actually, the power of consumers aggregated is quite significant.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to give an example. When we look at meat consumption, in very often the slaughterhouses, they operate with very thin margins. And just a shift in consumption, even 2 to 3% can have a significant impact on the business models of some of the slaughterhouses. So you don't actually need the whole of society to shift away from meat consumption. But even if a small reduction in meat consumption occurs, that's going to affect the system. And the meat industry, it's almost $1 trillion a year, So a very small consumer signal can have very significant effects on the system. So I'm not saying it in terms of burden, but there is responsibility and there's immense power in consumer movements.
Oh, thank you for that. And that's why I was clarifying also in terms of we're not putting burden on the consumers, but we have global and individual responsibility in this issue, food security and climate change. Absolutely, because the system needs to be fixed, but we need to help with that as well. There are certain things that we need to change. They're just small things in the way we consume food, we can use energy, we move around, that we need to change. We cannot continue in the same way, absolutely not, because we're wasting so much energy, we're wasting so much food. I said the third of the food produced for human consumption is wasted, and we waste that. Okay, so we can't just say it's the system who does. Of course, the system needs to be fixed. It's broken, and it cannot continue like that. But I think we, as citizens, as consumers, do have part of the responsibility as well. So we move now from the issues we've been talking about, the challenges, the difficulties, and I want to move on to the solutions. Each one of you bring up just one thing that you think this really need to be scaled up in relation to the issues you mentioned or other challenges. But let's focus really on solutions. Just give one example, what you think, one thing that looks promising, and either it happens in another country or in a different sector, and actually the agriculture and food security could benefit from that, and this is something that we need to to do and scale it up. Baroness, start with
I'm going to start off with the first positive, and I'm very pleased that Emma said about decommodifying food, because I think that's the foundation of what I was saying. We need massively more crop diversity, and this also picks up what Shana said. I mean, my figure is 3 crops provide more than 50% of human calories.
Yeah.
That's incredibly dangerous for food security, aside from anything else. You get one rust sweeps across our wheat crops, and that is an enormous risk. So much more crop diversity, and that needs to be attached to agroforestry. And if you want a UK example of where it's being done amazingly, and do visit if you can, Wakelands Agroforestry in Suffolk. It's amazing because it's in the middle of classic, huge expanse of classic arable soils built, ploughed up every year, pounded to pieces, to grow sugar beet. We could actually grow only 2/3 of the sugar that is grown now in the UK and not import a gram of sugar, and we would be producing more than we need for a healthy diet. And so instead of that terrible sugar beet fields, which actually destroys the soil, a large amount of British sugar's income actually comes from the soil coming off the sugar beet when you harvest it. So in the middle of this is Wakelands Agroforestry. Broadly speaking, this kind of permaculture principles working in different layers. You've got arable that's about 100 metre wide strips with trees, some of them fruit trees, some of them nut trees, hedges between them. That helps protect the soil. It protects the crops as they're growing from dehydration and wind, etc., etc. So we need to get a huge diversity of crops. And Africa used to grow sorghums, which are far more nutritious, far more drought resistant, and then they had the commodity Western systems imposed on them: grow wheat, grow wheat, grow wheat, grow maize, grow maize, grow maize. Let's look around the world and see all the wonderful crops we used to have. Another same area, hodmadods, which is a dialect word for hedgehogs from Suffolk, and they are growing beans and legumes in the UK. Black badger beans. We used to grow massive quantities of it, almost disappeared. They're bringing them back. So bring all these different crops back together and grow them with trees mixed together, working at different levels. So it's an entirely different looking landscape to what we have now. And it's thinking about what nutrients we grow. As Emma was saying, we've told farmers to produce calories. What we need to be doing is producing nutrients. And I'm very interested in the human microbiome. The experts in that are now saying we should all be eating 30 different vegetables and fruit a week. We don't produce anything like that kind of variety that we need in our diet.
Great, thank you. And thank you for mentioning diversification. That's really critical. Emma?
I mean, I was going to say something technical like linking loans to performance of farmers. So I think that is absolutely something we need to do. But I think actually the transformation we're talking about, we've been focusing on the environmental transformation. There's an economic transformation of the food system that needs to happen. But there's also a social one. So I think the solution I want to focus on really is the fact that we have an aging farmer network. 59 years average in the UK. I heard it's 58.1 years in America, in the US. So farmers are getting older. We're going to face a massive retirement issue. I think one of the solutions is in the youth. How do we attract new, young talent, innovative, exciting entrepreneurs into farming? I'm speaking to a lot of my farmers at the moment, and their sons and daughters don't want to take over the farm because they're going to be in debt. It's bloody hard work if you want to get up and do all the work. So they want to go off and go to university and do other things. So we need young talent coming into farming, or simply our food system will collapse. So I think there's a major solution in young people.
Great, thank you. Dennis?
I'll kind of build on what Emma has said. I mean, quite a lot of the work that we do is in the global south, mostly in Africa. And we are seeing the same, like people shifting away. Young people are not interested in farming, because it's not cool, it's not sexy. You don't want to be in farming, you want to go to the city, even though you don't have that many opportunities there. So it's about making farming cool again. And for me, a big part of that is around application of technology. Agriculture is behind most other sectors in terms of application of technologies. And what we are seeing is there are the technologies out there, but we are more reserved in terms of application of those technologies in agriculture. So what I would call for is accelerating technology adoption. I just want to give a quick example. I mentioned fertilizers, 2% of global emissions. But there are alternative technologies available to accelerate Green ammonia is one, microbials is another one, and each of these pillars, there are a number of new technologies available. But why don't they get applied? Why don't they get scaled? It's partly to do with there are a few large fertilizer companies who dominate the market and are resistant to change. So we need to have like the policy support and the investment support to find these kind of promising solutions and get them to scale. And that can get young people excited as well, because they are kind of ushering in that new era of food and farming.
Great, thank you. Shaina?
Yeah. So one of the things we're looking hard at is our global cold chain, which, if you know what that is, it's how do things stay cold from the farm to your plate, because that's where actually a lot of food waste happens, and we think this is a big technological opportunity. So 12% of food is spoiling globally. It's like $218 billion in the US, and it's 4% of global GHG. So it's a huge problem. And so we're looking at a couple of different things. Some technologies we've seen that are, I think, actually pretty simple but interesting are around logistics in the US. So 30% of trucks are trucking around with nothing in them, and a lot of those are cold capacity. So how do we figure out better loading and mechanisms, all done by paper still, like a dispatch is calling, and it's just like very manual process. So we're looking at just some softwares and technologies to better coordinate short haul and long haul freight, particularly around cold chain. We're also looking at technologies around refrigerants and just making better like blast freezers and other things from farm to restaurant. So we've been just spending a lot of time mapping that market, and on our Substack page for Supply Chain Capital, we have a market map of cold chain technologies, and there's 4 specific areas we're looking at. So that's something we're spending a lot of time on.
Great, thank you. I know that many of you have comments, and some of them commented here, and the gentleman who just brought me the piece of paper, and we don't have a mic for people to speak directly, so apologies for that. I mean, this is obviously a really complex and complicated topic, and there are many other issues that we could cover if we had more time. But this gave you a flavor of some of the challenges that we're facing and the difficulties, but also some of the solutions that exist in terms of diversification and innovation, and harnessing the power of innovation, not just in the broader sense, but smaller innovations and simpler innovations as well. And when we didn't talk about smallholder farmers, and around the world they're so important because they produce 70% of the food, and they need so much support. There was a comment here about the financial support needed for farmers, and smallholder farmers only receive 0.3% of international climate change. It's so small. So we're talking about this transformation. We are not going to be able to make it without these changes, including finance and the repurposing of subsidies as well. So I just want to finish with one point from each one of you. All this transformation we've been talking about, and we covered as many topics as we could. I'd just like you to leave the audience with one important message from you, either one issue or one action that we need to take. Just one thing. It could be small. You could be just tweeting if you want, and do something really small. Shayna, start with you.
Oh my gosh, one issue or action. Well, obviously I don't believe individually. No, I'm just kidding. I think we do overall, and actually a lot of it goes back to voting. So I hear there's a big election coming up here. There's a big one coming up in the U.S. And in the STEM, I love that wine glass analogy. I haven't heard that before, but in the STEM, like a lot of those decision makers around policy are touching and influencing so much of our food system. So more politicians with views like the Baroness. But really just making sure that you're voting. And in the U.S., I don't know what it's like here, but the U.S., it's not just national elections, it's really our local elections that a lot of this policy is being set. So I think that that's something really critical.
Great, that's the power of consumers. See, that's
we can still debate
it. We agree there. Danish?
So I would say, we might have differences of opinions on the solutions, but we need to move beyond getting stuck at that conversation and getting things action. And your solution can be different from mine, and yours can be another one, but we really need to move the whole system away from the current way of working, because as Zituni mentioned, that's broken. So I would say pragmatism, let's get things done,
Great, thank you. Emma?
I would say all of us today should take away a bit of evidence or a nugget that we've learned and get it on our boardroom's agenda. So it's, for me at Nestle, we are a food business. If nature collapses, if our soil is lost, we don't have a business anymore. And we've been around for 155 years. We want to be around for the next 155 years. So hearing what everyone's saying today, hearing those nuggets, get that on your boardroom's agenda, and then the issue gets taken seriously.
Great, thank you, Baroness.
I'm going to pick up what Danish said earlier about resetting power structures, and that indeed reflects what Shane has said about voting. We have to change the system. That means we have to change our politics. And just one specific action, you were talking, Emma, about getting young people into farming, and you were talking about smallholder farmers. We have the UK and much of the world's huge concentration of ownership. I sit in the House of Lords looking at the Conservative hereditary peers opposite me. We still have 92 people there because of who their father is. And I say what we need is land reform. And watch the winces. The power, the Kindling Trust in Manchester is a great organisation that's training young people who want to be farmers and growers. And one of their big issues is getting them access to land so they can start their businesses. So we've got to not think of the government over decades as been thinking farms have to get bigger. Actually, we have to enable the people who want to start growing vegetables and fruit in a healthy range, in a healthy way. How do they get access to 20 or 30 acres to be a grower in a ring round market gardens around towns and cities, and to put that on people's plates in towns, cities and villages.
Great, thank you. So thank you for all these points. So I think the conclusion is that the change has to happen because we cannot continue using natural resources in this way. It's not sustainable, and we are not resilient either. Whenever there is a shock, a pandemic or climate change or other, they disrupt the food supply and they cause problem for our way of living, basically. So we really need to be part of this change. And this is, for me personally, this is the message I want to convey, having been in the UN for 11 years and having worked in many areas related to climate change and food security. We need to be, I think it's exciting for us as consumers to have the responsibility to be part of the change. So to hold the politicians and others accountable for the change we want, but to be also part of the change we want to see. Why? Because it affects us. It affects our lives. We need to be part of that, bring in ideas, encourage young people also to be part of the change, because climate change is going to affect them more than us. It's here, it's staying. The more we adapt to it, the quicker we adapt to it, the better. So my point is, we need to be part of the change, in addition to the point that the panelists made as well. So thank you for staying with us, and I hope you found this useful. I hope you learned something, and please thank everyone.